So welcome. We have Haneef Salaam with us this evening from the Campaign for Smart Justice. He is the campaign manager, and that is a program within the ACLU. Haneef is a native Delawarean, born and raised in Wilmington. He is engaged in empowering the community and very passionate about helping individuals released from prison become positive and productive community members after making that change himself. Mr. Salaam has worked with government and nonprofit agencies focused on prisoner reentry for the past 10 years, holding positions such as president of the Delaware Reentry Consortium and community facilitator with IDAPT, the Governor's Reentry Initiative. He also started Building Success LLC, a small business that provides consultation and program planning for nonprofits. Prior to joining the ACLU of Delaware, Mr. Salaam was an in-reach coordinator for the Hope Commission at the Achievement Center. Mr. Salaam is passionate about helping disadvantaged populations find solutions and ways to overcome their barriers to success. In his free time, Mr. Salaam is a community advocate in Wilmington. So welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Lynn, and I'd like to thank this group for having me this evening. So I want to give everyone a short overview of Smart Justice and what our goals and priorities are, what we're currently working on, have an opportunity for Q&A. And then at the very end, for the sake of family, because family is a priority of mine, I have to make a hard stop at 7:45. But I want to leave this group with even a conversation topic that could go on till 8:15 hour of actual action steps that could be moved forward on. So the Campaign for Smart Justice was officially launched in 2019 and made tremendous efforts and was very successful in advocating and lobbying our legislator to introduce and pass multiple criminal justice reform laws around sentencing reform, expungement, and multiple other areas. The goal of Smart Justice is to reduce the prison population within 5 years. So that will put us in about the second year of this by 50%. And to reduce racial disparities within the criminal justice system. So we do that by focusing on various priorities each legislative session. This legislative session we started with, and we're still pretty much maintaining about 5 priorities, right? Number one was probation reform. So the Smart Justice Campaign, ACLU of Delaware with partners, has published a probation report. The probation report outlined some of the flaws within probation as far as there being more authoritative, seeking out violations, and working on ways to, have offender recidivate, as opposed to truly case managing and being issue focused to try to help individuals be successful upon reentry. Not only just highlighting some of those flaws, but offering suggestions of probation reform that would be make sense and would be easy to do in a manner that that it could be done if they so choose to prioritize. So because there is no bill associated with probation reform, and it is majority policy and procedure, we've just been planning to have a heavy focus on that in the summer once the session is out, right? In addition to probation reform, sentencing reform was named one of our 5 priorities. Really wanting to look at the computation process, making that easier. That is a process in which if an individual has role model good behavior over a period of time during the sentence, they may apply for sentence reduction, and or if they feel as though they have been sentenced in excess of the guidelines for the charges in which they're sentenced to. Currently, that is a very complicated process for individuals, which very few even get through the process or get to the point of being accepted and getting that sentence reduction. In addition to that, we have the Clean Slate Initiative. Clean Slate Initiative builds off of the expungement bill that was passed in 2019. Prior to the expungement bill in 2019, the only way for an individual with a criminal background to receive an expungement was to first get a pardon and then have to petition the courts for an expungement. And oftentimes individuals were advised to seek legal counsel. In 2019, the expungement bill passed, which broke expungement processes down into 3 categories. So expungement through pardon still exists for high-level felonies and most felonies in that fact. Some felonies and high-level misdemeanor charges fall into a discretionary lane where you still have to go through a expungement process, and it is decided if you are actually eligible due to the length of time you've been home, what's happened since you've been home, and the exact charges that you do have. And then you have a mandatory component in which most misdemeanors fall under, very little felonies, in which it's mandatory, it's required, you are eligible for expungement, and that process should take place if you, to my understanding, if you go through the process of getting your fingerprints done at one of the state troopers and you fall into mandatory, you should be notified that you qualify for a mandatory expungement. It is unclear how many people are actually receiving that. I know we have way more people eligible for mandatory expungements than has actually been expunged thus far. But that was a good first step in 2019. What Clean Slate has done is expanded the category of mandatory expungements to include some other low-level felonies, and I believe drug felonies, if I'm not mistaken. And so in addition to the mandatory lane, it will be automated. So which means after a certain period of time, if you are eligible for a mandatory expungement, the state will automatically expunge your record without you having to participate in that process at all. That will be a big help, I think another step, and I think we will continue to advocate that more charges with the correct amount of time after the charges be included for automated expungement. Right. In addition to Clean Slate, fines and fees is another priority. The Smart Justice Campaign, a coalition, decided to really delegate the lead in those efforts to the campaign to end debtors prison. And they have been doing a great job with working with Senator Brown as well as the Attorney General's office to get a strong fines and fees bill introduced. I am hopeful it will be introduced shortly, Lynn. Hopeful to the point that Clean Slate is sliding right through the Senate, being approved one, because there are 2 bills to Clean Slate, SB 112, which expanded the categories, and then SB 111, which automates the process. So forget which one actually went, which other 2 went today, but it went through unanimously through the Senate. So Clean Slate's on its way. Fines and fees should be coming shortly after, which is highly important, and I think will truly help reduce the prison population in a major way, because we have far too many people who are incarcerated due to inability to pay fines and fees. Right? So last but not least, most importantly, police reform has been a priority for this campaign, for this legislative session. It is a heavy focus of the Smart Justice Campaign right now. We just last week launched an initiative Delaware Police Accountability Now, DPAN, to really ensure that in this legislative session, we see a bill introduced that will amend the LEOBOR, that will allow for police disciplinary records to be accessible to the public, and to allow effective independent citizen review boards. And effective citizen review boards means that it has to have the authority for oversight. Oversight duties include the ability to communicate with departments and police partners, law enforcement and partners, to discuss and decide changes to policies and procedures and introducing new policies and procedures. They need to have authority for investigative purposes in the cases of alleged police misconduct, and they need to have the authority for subpoena power in the case that an officer should be called to the board in the case that alleged misconduct appears to be misconduct. One thing I want to clarify with citizen review boards, they are not a judge and jury. I think how police and law enforcement partners are painting the picture of independent civilian review boards as a board that will be able to judge and punish them. That is not the case. In a model in Philadelphia, which has the most effective civilian review board model in the country, where it goes is the civilian review board conducts an investigation. They give their report to law enforcement and attorney general's office. Law enforcement then decides the discipline for that officer, and that civilian review board will sign off if they approve of the discipline, right? So that's like a picture of what a civilian review board is. It's not the community trying to come over and mobs of community members want to judge the police for whatever incident that happens. It is much more strategic than that, and it is a model that works in collaboration with law enforcement and the Attorney General's office. So those are our priorities overall. I'm open to any questions that you may have, and then I'll come back around to action steps after I answer any questions that there may be about any of the priorities.
Haneef, do you want to give a little update on the progress that the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force has made? You know, the one that was legislatively created at the end of last session, and you know what it's been up to and where things stand now.
Sure. The Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force was an initiative announced by the Delaware Black Caucus back in June of last year, in direct response to the marching, protests, and rioting that was happening in Wilmington and places up and down the state. Right. So they have been meeting. They had 4 subcommittees: use of force, workforce development, community policing, and transparency and accountability. All of those subcommittees have given recommendations for the task force and mainly the General Assembly to consider towards making changes in police reform. I think each of the subcommittees did due diligence in researching and identifying best practices that are going on in other cities and states across the country, and then coming up with logical ideas that could work in Delaware. The task force voted. I think it was a pretty good vote they did 3 out of the 4 subcommittees. They voted yes unanimously to a lot of the recommendations. Law enforcement was particular in voting no to anything that even mentioned amending or changing LEOBOR. But those suggestions still passed through with a yes. There were only 2, to my recollection, that did not get through, and that was one stating to end qualified immunity. But they also voted yes to looking into and possibly changing the wording around qualified immunity, if I'm not mistaken. The second one that was a no or didn't even make it up for a vote because the subcommittee did not unanimously vote on it did include civilian review boards to my point. I mean, to my recollection. But there were talks in general senses of civilian review boards that did get a yes. So it was a good vote. Most of our legislators who plan to sponsor bills around police reform were waiting for this task force to have a meeting and a vote. So that was done today, although the transparency and accountability recommendations were not. They have to schedule another meeting. They ran out of time because they were not clear on how they were going to vote on the recommendations, although they should have been prepared for that prior to the meeting, in my opinion. But that stalled the vote from one subcommittee, which in my opinion is the most important because it spoke specifically and clearly to what needed to be changed to Delaware to allow for effective civilian review boards and police disciplinary records.
Haneef, could you explain a little bit more why you felt it was the most important again?
I think that the amendments to Delaware are the most important because if we do not have independent boards that are able to investigate misconduct of officers, we'll continue to have officers not being held accountable for misconduct. So even if we change the use of force policy and we leave it for internal investigations to continue to be the standard, the misconduct will continue to be allowed, covered up, whatever term you want to use. But we have to recognize that zero police since 2005 have been charged or found guilty with any misconduct in Delaware.
Thank you.
Did you say 2005?
Yes, ma'am. It may exceed that, but if I have my information correct, since 2005, there have been over 50 police-involved shootings, and 31 of them ending in the loss of life. And there have been zero charges or convictions in those instances. Most recently, an officer, the Department of Justice, has pressed charges on a WPD officer in the shooting of Yaheem Harris. It is not due to the excessive force. It is due to the fact that this police officer changed the barrel of his gun to have a larger barrel on his police force issued weapon and lied about it during the investigation. So those are the charges brought up. But with Leo Board, this is another thing with internal investigation. The Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights has specific language around how an officer is to be investigated. So if an officer feels as though he said the wrong thing or the investigation is not going in his favor, he can request that investigations be stopped for the day. He can consult with his fellow officers to identify what he needs to do and say next. And then investigations will resume at a time that he's comfortable with it resuming. So this is the importance of having an independent investigation so that we can just have smart justice. We are not trying to leverage the scales of justice. We feel as though if people are doing or operating or indulge in misconduct, that they should be held accountable. Citizens, police, everyone should be accountable for their wrongdoings in a fair and just manner.
If I understand that Smart Justice feels that amending the Delaware legislation is the better path than recalling it or canceling it, if you will, whatever the right term is. why did Smart Justice feel it was better to amend it than get rid of it and start from scratch?
Honestly, because it kind of comes to the initiative that we're at now, like with the police accountability now. This is a heavy lift and a tough fight. Law enforcement at this point is taking a stance along with all Republican legislators, to my knowledge, and even some of our more conservative Democrats who may be on the fence and have ties to law enforcement are really hesitant or are not with doing anything at all. So to go to an action to repeal Leo Board would, in my opinion, and I think overall with the Smart Justice opinion, that would have been a 3-year, 2, 3, 5-year plan to be able to repeal it. I mean, it's just not realistic when you look at our legislators and the amount of legislators that we have that are connected or ex-law enforcement. So if you amend it in a way where you can then have that's why the independent review boards are so important. This could be individuals like you or I, right, that are participating in these review boards who may have an understanding of what we believe policing should be done, who have a firm understanding and knowledge of definitely what is right or wrong, that can consult and make sure that it's a fair and just process. The police themselves have not shown us that they can just have an internal process that holds officers of misconduct accountable. And in my opinion, it's outrageous. I mean, you got to think about it. The officer who was alleged for use of force kicked the young man in Dover in the face, right, while handcuffed. No charges pressed, nothing. His job was terminated, but I do not believe it was terminated for those reasons, or he chose to resign. Goes right down the state line, you know what I mean? Probably had to move 30 minutes from where he was currently living. Goes across the state line, and then later kills a young man while on duty. So this is out of control. And in any other profession, we would be looking at these individuals who do operate in misconduct and say something needs to be done immediately. It's only law enforcement where it appears to be justified and it's a slow fight. So it's the view that at least let's just amend Leo Board in a manner that we could at least be able to start holding individuals who are guilty of misconduct accountable.
You feel that we have a pretty decent chance of a meaningful amendment before the end of June?
I think so, but that's part of the action steps. I think right now there are efforts to really apply a lot of pressure on the individuals from the Delaware Black Caucus, and I believe Senator Lockman is going to be sponsoring Leo Board bill along with Rep. Kendra Johnson. I think their initial plans and their comfort zone is to introduce the bill in 2 forms. One, introducing like soon and very soon a bill that will amend Leo Board to allow for police disciplinary records. And then hopefully we would have to cross our fingers that the bill to allow for effective civilian review boards will follow shortly after and be able to get through prior to June 30th. We like to see both of those things included in one bill. We're pushing for that. I don't know how soon or exactly when Senator Lockman is going to introduce these bills, but I do think that is necessary. Even with police disciplinary records, I think, in my opinion, having the ability to have effective independent civilian review boards is absolutely one of the most important things that we need if we're going to have true police reform and be able to have individuals who conduct misconduct held accountable.
Thank you.
Could you say a little bit about how Delaware compares to other states? I mean, I know you mentioned Philadelphia, but I've heard that Delaware currently has the most restrictive or secretive law enforcement officer Bill of Rights in the country. And I know that there's been a lot of activity in all the states surrounding us, most recently with Maryland doing some big things. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Currently, as of last year, there were only 15 states with Leo Board laws, law enforcement officer bill of rights, enacted in their state code. Uh, I believe that number is reduced. I know that New York really was successful in repealing, but I know that it did get vetoed. I have not been studying and looking. I do not know currently where New York stands. But if it did not move forward the full repeal, I know that they are reforming, and the reform is in progress in New York. Maryland, also, Maryland, and I believe if I have my information correct, was the first state with Leo Board laws. I've seen a lot of headlines that say they repealed their Leo Board, but when I read into the article, I believe that they amended it, but they amended it in a way where they addressed use of force. They also addressed the ability to have independent review boards and data transparency. Jersey as well. So when you already look and see collectively at this point, Delaware is probably one of 13 states that currently has an enacted Leo Board law as it was originally drafted. Delaware's is the worst when it comes to the concealing of records and internal investigation, banning any of that information from being public forever. And I don't think any state in the country has language speaking such like Delaware. So that, kind of shows you where we at. And just today with my public comment, I just added at the end that, we could do this in a way where we start a new Delaware way, right? I see this working in a way where non-law enforcement and law enforcement could work in a way that will reform policing in a historic manner, that will develop true community among officers in all communities. Because at the end of the day, if we're honest, there's not a lot of white people that have these issues from officers in their communities. It's quite the opposite. A lot of times in white communities, officers are looked at as heroes, and they truly fulfill their mission of protecting and serving. And so we just want to see that in every community and not have a group of individuals just feel like they're being hunted or just, like I recently said with the pullover thing, sometimes in certain times in interactions with police, you feel like they're just doing anything, trying to get lucky to catch somebody doing something, as opposed to being more strategic at really identifying and arresting criminals who are perpetrating crimes in Wilmington. Because we all want to live in safe communities as well.
Did you feel that the reporting of your personal experience in this arena some months ago in the News Journal on Monday was accurate? Was that a good article from your perspective?
Yes, I think so, and I really think it only scratches the surface on that issue. I mean, there are many Wilmingtonians that I know who are in my age and who have redeemed themselves from their past and experience this all the time. There are many affluent African American males who experience it all the time just for the fact that they're Black and they're driving a luxury car. And yeah, it began to scratch the surface. I was satisfied with the article. I think it just opens the eyes to how different communities are policed.
Well, thank you for being willing to do that.
Could I ask a question? And Lynn may have told us this before, and I apologize if I've forgotten, but in the efforts to change how policing is done, did any of these four groups or the Black Caucus try to approach how, for example, people with mental health issues would be approached? Persons who, in other words, people who are not necessarily criminals, but just call 911 and have issues that need attention. Was there any thought to changing the approach of the system?
Yes, ma'am. And if I remember correctly, I think that was mentioned in both the workforce development and community policing recommendations. And one, getting more training for officers and dealing with individuals with a mental health situation, looking at having professionals that operate in collaboration with officers that can respond to a crisis and de-escalate without the use of force and potentially without the police involvement. And then also having, they brought up having mental health checks for officers frequently throughout the force, and then more specifically in the case that that officer had to participate in use of force or had a crisis of response. Any other questions?
Haneef, do you want to talk about any of the other, I guess, priority police reform initiatives that, for which recommendations were approved today, use of force, or any of the others where there were recommendations and likely legislation moving forward?
Sure. Because I do have a heavy focus. I'm glad you mentioned that. I do have a heavy focus on Leopold and really pushing that. In addition to Leopold, there will be, I believe there will be use of force legislation introduced. The use of force subcommittee recommended 10 suggestions today to the Accountability Task Force, and they approved all 10 suggestions. I do believe there is a legislator that's going to sponsor use of force legislation. I do think use of force is going to be a 2-bill process, with only 1 bill probably being introduced and passed this session, in my perspective, from my communications of what's going on. And that bill will change the Delaware Code to have language that says all police departments across the state need to have a uniformed use of force policy with minimum requirement and standards included. And then there will be a process throughout the summer and the 6-month break to identify individuals who should be a part of and begin creating a new use of force policy, including law enforcement and non-law enforcement individuals. I do understand that there is going to be legislation around body cameras introduced. And although that has not been a priority necessarily of the Smart Justice campaign, I do think that is a very important step with police transparency. I do think one thing I'll be keeping my eye out for with a body camera legislation is to see if it has language speaking to the storing and sharing of that data and the timeline. The governor did say that he wanted to have something where all police officers had it in the state, but his plan included a fiscal plan that would have a trickle-down process, and it would not be fully implemented into 2025. I'm hoping the legislation that's introduced is a little bit more aggressive than that, with a shorter timeline, and speaks to storage and sharing of the data. And then data transparency was mentioned, I think, almost in all 3 subcommittees today. The ability for law enforcement to begin collecting basic data on the work that they're doing and their outcomes, and making that information accessible to the public. So these are all things that I'm hopeful, and it appeared from the task force that these are where the agreements lie, and they are willing to work on these things. I do think it is going to be a 2-year process on a lot of these things before we actually see actual implementation and changes. Again, so that's why I put a heavy focus on Leopold. So as we are working on these long-term things, we can ensure that we have the mechanisms in place to keep a checks and balances on what actual changes are being made and what to do in the case of when it is time to hold somebody accountable. So in closing, I like to say this. I like to ask you to just consider and think about doing three things. One, an easy one is, I believe Lynn has it, but if she doesn't, we have a Leopold one pager, both one that the ACLU, along with the Urban League and Building People Power created. Also, there is a Leopold one pager that the Coalition for Fair Policing has created, a more simplified version of the one that we did. If you would, please share that within your circles, whether it's just personally, through email. Please just understand Leopold and the reforms we're trying to make, and have this as a conversation topic amongst your smaller circles. Two, I will ask you to reach out to your legislators. If you agree with any of the police reform or necessary police changes, please reach out to your home senator and representative. As I've mentioned in this talk, there is heavy focus on the Delaware Black Caucus and organizing of their constituents. A lot of times where there is opposition or people in the fence are more of legislators of white suburban areas. So if you could personally reach out to your home senator and representative and let them know of your support for police reform in any manner, I think that will be highly effective in the change that we're doing. And three, if you truly, truly would like to see police reform, police accountability done now in this legislative session, then again, reach out into your smaller circles and your networks and encourage those individuals to contact their home legislators as well.
Haneef, I know on the ACL website, there's a letter correspondence that you can sign up and sign on to in support of the Leopold letter. Is that something that?
Yes, sir. And that's what I failed to mention. And I can put the website in the chat for everybody, or if it's necessary. But yes, if you do go to the ACLU of Delaware's website, we do have a full direct action campaign going on right now, where you can just follow some basic steps and participate in that manner.
Okay.
All right. Well, I hope that this presentation was informational for you all. I hope that anybody that is in agreement or in support with anything that we are doing right now, or at all, at any level, would please just contact their own legislator and just give them a sense of urgency that we just would like to see police reform take place in the state of Delaware this legislative session.
Thank you, Haneef.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much. Enjoy the time with your family.
Thanks for having me. Good
Take care.
evening, everyone.
Good
Bye-bye.
evening.
Thank you.
And the rest of us can stay on and continue to discuss the topic. I may be able to answer some questions, but I think there's certainly a lot of meat here to go through. I know for me, it was a very steep learning curve